It was on this day 8 years ago that nearly 3,000 Americans were killed in a series of coordinated terror attacks in New York City and on the Pentagon.
The City of New York will lead the tributes to those who died in a ceremony at Ground Zero later today. Dr. Geoffrey Garrett is the CEO of the United States Studies Centre and he joins us now from Sydney. Geoffrey Garrett, good morning.
Good morning, how are you?
Not too bad, thanks. Now, 8 years on and the US is still coming to terms with this, isn't it?
I think that's true, but in important respects today, other events have overwhelmed the sort of 9/11 hangover in the US. I think regular Americans today are most concerned about the state of the economy and their well-being and the impact of President Obama's healthcare plans on that. Things like the Afghanistan war and whether and how the president can close Guantanamo Bay are really more something the chattering classes are focusing on than regular people.
But those wars are still a significant issue for the general American population, both the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Well, they're enormous wars, obviously. We have still over 100,000 American troops in Iraq and probably 60 or 70,000 troops in Afghanistan, and that number's likely to increase. But I think it's probably fair to say that the American public really hasn't been thinking much about the war in Afghanistan. President Obama said on the campaign trail it was the right war. I think for most Americans it's more like the forgotten war. That can't last forever, but I think that's where the country is today.
Now, just getting back to September 11, it really did mark the beginning of a new chapter in global security, didn't it?
I think that's absolutely true, and that really began with the fact that the September 11 attacks were a massive psychological trauma to America's collective psyche, from regular people all the way to the president, and it clearly triggered an enormous change in US foreign policy and then probably a global reaction against that, against the sort of in-your-face unilateralism of the Bush administration.
Now, do you believe Osama bin Laden is still alive, and how much a factor is that in this still being an unresolved issue for America?
The Osama bin Laden story, of course, is a really complicated one. I don't know whose spin one should believe on this. Do you believe the American government? Do you believe things that come out of Al Jazeera or these tapes that show up every once in a while? I think what we do know is that irrespective of whether Osama bin Laden is still around and directing Al-Qaeda, terrorism, Islamic extremism, is still a really important force in the world. At the moment, I think most American elite attention is focused on the resurgence of the Taliban in Afghanistan. Now, how closely are they related to Al-Qaeda, we don't know, but they certainly have some very similar objectives.
So even if Afghanistan is one day stabilised, Pakistan is still a massive problem in terms of Islamic extremism, isn't it?
It sure is, and what the US can do about Pakistan is a really hard question. You know, if America is criticized for not having good Pakistan policy, and I think the legitimate question to ask in response is, what would better Pakistan policy be? The US isn't going to invade Pakistan. Pakistan has a very powerful military and it has nuclear weapons. So doing anything more than trying to have the best elite diplomatic exchanges you can with Pakistan seems to me a tall order, but that doesn't seem to be working so well.
Now, the great fear is extremists actually getting their hands on one of those nuclear weapons you just mentioned. You also talked about how the issue of September 11 has faded in the psyche of Americans over the past couple of years. Getting their hands on a nuclear weapon would be the next step for extremists. How likely do you believe that it is that will happen?
I'm not an expert in this area, but there are some people who are expert who come up with some pretty alarming probabilities. For example, estimates of something like a 20% chance over the next decade that there would be a terrorist-inspired nuclear explosion in the United States. It's a low probability event, but the consequences would be so catastrophic, everybody in the defense community has to take it very seriously.
Is it seen as a real possibility in the States?
Absolutely, but I think what's happening at the moment is that average Americans are just fixated on their economic problems. Today we just had a new statistic come out that said that poverty in the US has gone up to about 13% of the population. The unemployment rate is going to hit 10% in the next couple of months. That's what Americans are concerned about. Of course, anything like a terrorist attack would change everything instantaneously, but unless and until that happens, I think these national security issues are going to remain a concern of the elite rather than something that's moving the mass public.
September 11 really marked the day when Islamic extremism came to the fore. Can you see a day now where the world will not be concerned about the threat of Islamic extremism?
I think you can see a day, but the day is probably going to be decades away rather than months or years away, because ultimately the solution to Islamic extremism can't be a military one. It's got to be a political and economic one, essentially the modernization of the Muslim world, and that's going to take a very long time.
Okay, Geoffrey Garrett in Sydney, thanks very much for talking to us this morning.
It was my pleasure. Thank you.